But I always like to remind everyone, like Wirecard's a very rare case of successful whistleblowing
Yeah.
because the company actually suffered the consequences.
Right.
But in most cases, whistleblowers get exposed in the
Yeah.
process and absolutely damaged.
Right.
So yeah, it's something to always keep in mind.
Welcome to Brave. Learn from Southeast Asia's best tech leaders. Build the future, learn from our past, and stay human in between. No BS on success. I'm Jeremy Au, venture capitalist, serial founder, Harvard MBA, science fiction nerd, and dad of 2 daughters. Every week, we debate startup news, interview changemakers, answer listener questions, and share personal insights. Join our movement of over 40,000 members and get transcripts, resources, and community at www.bravesea.com. Stay well and stay brave.
Hey, Pav, good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting because I've heard about your story through bits and pieces, and now I finally get to see the person behind this whistleblower story. Anyway, I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Sure. So I'm Pav. I started as a lawyer.
Yeah.
I spent maybe 5-6 years in some Magic Circle firms, Allen Overy, Clifford Chance. 4 years was in the Middle East as well. And then I came back to Singapore. I joined my first fintech startup called GoBear. I like to say it's a very innocent startup because it was just doing comparison, like what's the best insurance rates and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And of course, compared to what came after that, it was definitely a big change. So Wirecard was the next one. I was the first head of legal for the Asia Pacific region. I was headhunted by them. And then all the fun stuff happened. And then I left the company, joined Wise as the first APAC counsel, and then moved to the crypto space, 2 years in Bangkok. And now I'm a founder and CEO of my own startup.
Yeah, fantastic. So lots to unpack here. And I think just go me straight to the beginning here is, you when you became a lawyer in the first place, were you like you want to be a lawyer because fight for justice, or like when you were like it's like everybody's making a decision whether to be a lawyer or
Yeah.
banker or something like that. I think after you around university at that level, right? So why did you decide to be a lawyer in the first place?
I mean, my mom's a single parent.
Yeah.
So she had actually raised me while she was doing her law degree.
Oh, okay.
I used to be at the back of her lectures with my coloring book.
Right.
And then when we go home, I'll ask her what's the meaning of constitution, criminal, and because she was studying, right? So I think that seed was planted from that moment.
Right.
And it was definitely more fun in the sense that
Yeah.
I used to like debates.
Right.
I actually founded the debate society in Victoria School.
My
And
best friend of many years was one of your descendants, I guess, then as a result. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, and it's more fun for me than maths and science, which
Yeah.
I wasn't like perfect at, or anywhere close. So yeah, it was a natural thing. Just be a
Yeah.
lawyer. I never expected to be a lawyer in the finance space.
Yeah.
I always was very driven by wanting to represent the downtrodden and destroy counsel on the other side. Yeah. And also my first novel was A Time to Kill by John Grisham,
yeah?
which was also his first book.
Yeah.
So in primary six, I read that. And I think from there on,
Yeah.
after reading The Firm and all these other books by him, I was like, yeah, this is definitely what I want to be.
Be a lawyer because it sounds so exciting in the book, right? I mean, so, but then what's interesting, your life did become exciting. So most people, I would say, like when you read a John Grisham book about legal thriller, their life is quite boring and they end up writing contracts, and obviously there's a bunch of work. But let's talk about that. So you work at a bunch of different corporate careers, and what's it like to obviously be a GoBear, which is, I think, for those who know early days of the Singapore tech scene, we remember GoBear. But what was it like to be headhunted by Wirecard? Like, was it like a positive experience? Were you looking to leave GoBear? How did you get headhunted? Yeah.
Yeah, I was super happy to be hired by Wirecard. So it was there was a headhunted process to it where I was approached by a recruiter.
Yeah.
I was very desperate to be in the fintech scene. So that's why I joined GoBear, for example. And I had a huge, massive pay cut. I think I was getting, after CPF, like 5K a month.
Yeah. That sounds about right.
But that was really the sacrifice I made to get in the fintech space because I was always doing corporate finance.
Right.
And I always had an insane interest in tech.
Yeah.
I think we are from the generation that grew up with the 486 Pentiums. We used to go to Sim Square and build them.
Yeah.
Right. But there wasn't any kind of IT fintech aspect in terms of the law.
Right.
There was a whole IT boom, the dot-com boom. which I wasn't part of. So when fintech was booming, I was like, okay, let's not miss this boat. So that was how I got into it. So Wirecard was great because of the autonomy and the fact that, of course, my salary was being equalized.
Yeah, back to normal.
Yeah, which is super essential for Singapore, right? It's an expensive place to be.
Yeah.
But the fact that I was looking after 13 markets in the region, and it was a German company, I was obviously doing very well.
Yeah.
I think that gave me a sense of happiness to be
Yeah.
part of this place.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that today, we remember it as a unicorn that imploded because of fraud. But at that time, how big was Wirecard when it headhunted you from your perspective?
It was big. It was already, I think it already had a market cap of, in USD, about 30 billion at least.
Yeah.
So it was already bigger than Deutsche Bank and
Yeah.
Commerzbank combined.
Yeah.
And it was listed, and they were trying to get into the DAX index, which they eventually did during my time.
Yeah.
So they kicked Commerzbank out of the DAX index and took its place. So it was a very big company and clearly doing well.
Yeah. And so they had hired you because they were expanding in APAC and they wanted you to be the legal counsel for them. So what was your first day like at Wirecard? Was like a laptop, or I think everybody was in the office back then. Nobody was working remotely, I guess. But I'm just kind of curious, like, do you remember your first day at Wirecard?
Yeah, my first day was actually in Munich.
Yeah.
And it was fantastic because it was Oktoberfest.
Oh.
So, and I'd never been to Germany before, so that was a great start, right?
Yeah.
The general counsel told my direct supervisor to take me around Munich.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it was a good start. But in terms of laptop, when I flew back to Singapore 3 days or 2 days later, no one even knew why I was here. So I didn't get my laptop. Yeah, so it was quite a shock in terms of how Europe was structured, Wirecard-wise. Very formal, the setup's advanced.
Yeah.
And then Singapore and APAC was run in a very startup way.
Right. It was like a co-working space or...
No, they had a proper office in Asia Square.
Yeah.
But because they came into the region through a series of M&As, so they're just buying up these obscure payment companies for big amounts of money.
Right.
And also they purchased Citibank's merchant acquiring business.
Right.
So all the terminals and stuff, that was a Citi transaction to Wirecard.
Yeah.
So that's why they hired me as well, because finally they couldn't do the legal stuff out of Munich.
Yeah.
It was just getting too intensive.
Yeah.
And their structure was so lean. Like they only had 13 legal and compliance staff globally, which for a company that's processing billions in payments, it makes no sense.
Yeah. And I think part of it obviously is like, it makes sense, right? Payments is a pain in the ass for so many people, right? Like there's wiring across borders and wiring across different currencies. And I think at that time it was like 2008,
17.
Yeah.
Or 18.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it wasn't easy even back then. And so obviously the concept of like a unicorn company that makes payments easy, to me feels like a slam dunk.
Yeah.
Like, especially because they already got to the scale and you need that scale for payments.
Yeah.
So it's kind of confusing because obviously we know, I think of Wirecard's failure, but I think we're kind of getting to it. But when did you start to notice something was like going wrong, I guess? Yeah. Because like I said, it's a big team, billion-dollar company, he's doing M&A, seems to be doing everything right. Product market fit makes sense. Payments make it easier. So when did you start saying like, oh, something is like not right? Yeah.
Because all the subsidiaries were loss-making.
Yeah.
So where was the money coming from? And that was something you could verify from filed financials. And the financials will always file late,
Yeah.
1.5 years late. They'll get warnings and everything. And the way this Indonesian guy called Ido was running the finance side of things was very dubious.
Yeah.
Because the guy had his CV didn't add up, was inexperienced. He didn't speak English properly or German for that matter. Why was he hired as the third most powerful person in the finance team, right? And also, Wirecard, like to say, was a fintech company focusing more on the tech element, but no one saw where that was coming from. It was very basic tech. Alipay and all these other providers were doing way more advanced things. So where was the money coming from? So that was the first red flag. And then obviously that led at some point to an internal whistleblower that came to me, fearing for her life, because she didn't want to carry out transactions that were clearly illegal anymore. So that's what kicked everything off.
Yeah. So let's dig deeper into both of them, right? Because I think there's this like moment where you're starting to realize this stuff, right? Like, what was it like for you to realize? Because like the fact that, I mean, most lawyers are like, give me the document, in then out, right? No one's gonna like, oh, let me look at the financial subsidiary.
Yeah.
It's loss making. All of them are loss making. Does it add up? Like, So my first question kind of is like, were you more concerned about the Asia subsidiary than the global? Were you thinking that you were thinking that was more of a Southeast Asia issue at the start?
Yeah, because I was looking after the whole of Asia,
Right.
and I was involved in the financial stuff because ACRA was sending warning letters.
Right.
Like, you haven't filed your financial statements.
Right.
So this becomes a legal issue,
Right.
right? And then the question is, when you dig deep, you realize for 5 years they were always filing them late after warnings,
Right.
and the money just wasn't there.
Right.
So but yet when they were announcing EBITDA every quarter,
Right.
that's like hundreds of millions equivalent to what the European side was announcing.
Right.
So it was quite funny for the local staff,
Right.
because I guess the sales staff were very happy,
Yeah.
because they were apparently selling stuff without knowing it. But yeah, so that was the big question. Where was the money coming from?
Right.
Which products, which country? Because we don't see it on the subsidiary level.
Right. So the gap for you was more like Europe was reporting good Asia numbers,
Yes.
but you knew the Asia numbers were not good based on what everyone was saying. And so you felt like there was a gap in that communications or messaging.
Yeah, but it's not what everyone was saying. Like, these are verifiable facts.
Yeah.
Because you have to file your financial statements with
Yeah.
ACRA, right?
Right.
And possibly for all the other countries, you can extract those statements from the equivalent of ACRA.
Right.
So it was there for everyone to see, including the auditors.
Right.
So that was a big question mark. But of course, it is not normal, or at least it shouldn't be normal, for people to go into companies and start looking for issues,
Right.
which people do. It's really bad, especially in the compliance space. I actually know people that actively do that and then try to get a higher salary or whatever, right? Or build leverage against the CEO so they don't get fired so easily.
Right.
But it was not in my nature to do that. I was actually trying to figure things out, which is why I was hired. So when Munich hired me, they told me they want me to be the eyes and ears on the ground for the team,
Right.
and figure out what's happening. So I thought it was an integration issue, because when you expand so fast, clearly that's integration problems, right?
Right.
And of course, Asia is a beast of its own, because every country is unique culturally.
Right.
We're talking about 2 subsidiaries in Indonesia. Vietnam had one. India had the most infamous one, and then Singapore, Malaysia, and all these things. So I really thought that I could give some value add as someone who's Singaporean, who's familiar with the APAC region,
Right.
and assist this poor Western company in assimilating from an integration standpoint.
Right. And so what I'm hearing is like you're like, okay, clearly the reporting at Mothership or the HQ is off from what we're seeing in APAC. APAC, they're doing these filings, it doesn't add up. And so you thought that you were reporting the HQ, you thought it was just a communication error and it would be something that would be fixed. So when did it become like, and then I think when did it become like, oh, this is not actually like I said, a management misunderstanding of financials, which happens when companies are scaling, to be like, oh, this is a little bit more systematic or structural. Was it like you said when the whistleblower came in? Or? Yeah.
No, there were really serious question marks because of the way this Edo guy was running the business, the finance side.
Right.
I mean, every month he would fly to Munich to beg for wages for the whole of the region.
Right.
So if a company is multi-billion dollars in valuation, why is this happening?
Right.
Why are wages being an issue? Should not you have budgeted wages for the year?
Right.
So all these are really one-on-one things, right? Like logic, you don't even need to be a finance person.
Right. Yeah.
It just doesn't make any sense. So of course, then the whistleblowing triggered that, because again, as a lawyer, you would wait for the objective incident or evidence to come across that you can then work off. Because you may have all the suspicions in the world, but then that's all they are, right? You need that trigger event or that smoking gun event, which would then allow you to kickstart a independent and objective look at what's going on.
Right. Yeah. And so let's kind of like dive deeper into that, right? Which is you're discussing this, it doesn't seem to make sense. And you said there was an internal whistleblower to talk to you. So obviously you are known as the whistleblower.
Yeah.
But we said there was a whistleblower who talked to you first, so it was a bit like, I don't know, Russian eggs, balls going down. But what was the context of that conversation? Was like in the office, or was it coffee? Like, how did this person, and why did this person want to talk to you instead of talking to her manager or somebody else? Yeah.
Because she didn't trust HR. So HR was viewed as the spies of management.
Yeah.
I think that's also an issue in many companies for
Right.
whatever reason. So she didn't trust HR. And then I guess because she was being forced to carry out illegal transactions, she didn't want to do them anymore.
Right.
She came to the legal person, which
Yeah.
was me.
Yeah.
And we were both kind of new in the company.
Yeah.
So I think there was that level of trust that,
Right.
okay, he's also new.
Yeah.
So he's probably not part of this whole thing.
Right.
So yeah, she called me one evening and I decided to meet her outside the office the next morning
Yeah.
and get all the stuff that she had.
Yeah.
So that's why when you talk about the Russian eggs thing, Wirecard's very interesting because it's a case of double whistleblowing.
Yeah.
There was the internal whistleblower that came to me,
Yeah.
and then how I became the external whistleblower, which is what I always nowadays try to prevent companies or tell companies you can prevent is the external whistleblowing.
Right.
So encourage the internal one so you can prevent the external one and not get hit.
Right.
Yeah, so that's why Wirecard's interesting in that way.
Yeah. And so tell me more about that conversation. Obviously, you didn't show who the person is, but was it like over coffee? Was it, what was the emotional tone of that conversation on both sides? Obviously, it was the first time you're hearing it. How was your reaction? But what was that scene like? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the person genuinely feared for her life
Yeah.
for various reasons, and I met outside the office because of that, because then it becomes very spy-like, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're really working in a criminal organization,
Yeah.
you don't want things in the office could be bugged or whatever.
Grisham, a Grisham
Yeah.
novel. Yeah.
And it's just a matter of disconnecting the person from the
Yeah.
office setting, because that
Yeah.
could intimidate someone.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, I need coffee first thing in the morning. So we went to Providor or UE Gallery.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why. So if you actually watch the movie, which I'm in,
Yeah.
it's the Sky documentary,
Yeah.
that films everything and how
Right.
it went down. So yeah, she gave me the stuff straight away. I told my supervisors in Munich,
Yeah.
and they said, okay, go investigate, right?
Yeah.
So that's when the investigation kickstarted.
So this seems okay so far, right? I mean, if it was a movie,
Yeah.
then the second part of it would be the internal whistleblower does it, you report it up to your superiors started said, okay, time investigation. And then probably some hits will roll in the APAC region for illegal transactions. But obviously that's not what happened because... So what happened? I mean, because I think what were the illegal transactions? I think that's the content of it. But two, obviously the investigation stopped, right? So I'm just kind of curious how that played out. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was given access to this Ido guy and two of his sidekicks, currently who are both in jail in Singapore.
Right. Yeah.
I was given access to their raw inboxes. So
Yeah.
the whole inbox they ever had since they joined the company.
Oh, okay.
So I spent the weekend, I remember, looking into the sidekicks inboxes, and what I found was really insane. Like these guys were blatantly emailing logos to themselves and putting those logos on Wirecard invoice-looking templates.
Oh, shit.
So it wasn't very sophisticated, which upset me to some extent.
Yeah.
Because I was like, if it was a multi-billion-dollar company engaging in fraud, I expected it to be very sophisticated,
Right.
not basic stuff. But then I thought, okay, maybe this is the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
There has to be a reason why they're doing these things which could potentially, if you look into it, lead to other things. So to me, that was a slam dunk thing. That's forgeries, there's creating of fake contracts and all these money movements, clearly indicating round tripping. So yeah, I thought like it's just Ido and these few bad eggs that we need to deal with. And once they leave the company, then things would resume.
Right.
Because I thought they were perpetuating a fraud on the European side.
Right.
I didn't expect that initially to think that, no, they were coordinating it or whatever they were doing was linked up.
Right.
So when the board found out, after the general counsel found out, because she didn't know apparently that I was doing this thing, even though I was always told that she knew.
Yeah.
So one day when the whistleblower was fearing for her life, wanted to go to MAS and the police and stuff, I had no choice but to call her and say, look, we need to manage this. Because if we don't and it goes outside, then it gets way worse, right? So she didn't know, and then she said, send me what you have, which was the Raja and Tan report. It was a preliminary report. It had like at least 10 potential offenses in there. So I sent it to her. She ran to the board found out. They then spent the next 4 months with the local director here, trying to coordinate and make my life really, really difficult, including trying to kill me at the end of it.
So this is the wheels fall off the story because to the first half of that feels totally reasonable, right? So you're reporting to a lawyer, the lawyer reports to general counsel of the whole company, general counsel obviously reports to the CEO and the board. Okay, that makes sense. And then you're telling me general counsel didn't understand what was going on, also kind of makes sense. Then you checking the inbox because your boss, I guess your boss didn't know either.
They knew.
The direct boss knew.
Yes. So he was the one that gave me the access to it. So the deputy general counsel gave me access to the inboxes.
So he was in a know, but he let you investigate?
Yeah, because they're sitting in Germany.
But
I'm on the ground here.
But then he knew that this fraud was happening?
I have no idea.
Yeah, but probably not, right? Because otherwise, why would he give you? I'm just saying, like...
What he did say was that Wirecard has two camps.
Right.
One is the pro-Ido camp, which is very powerful.
Yeah.
So he's been assured a permanent future in the company regardless of what happens.
Right.
And then there's a small bunch of them that want to do the right thing and have a more legal and compliant culture.
Right.
So that's why he said this would be our chance to get an independent third party like the law firm
Right,
to look
Roger
at it,
Tan.
because then the company will be forced to act.
Right.
Because then it's not a personal thing like, okay, Pav doesn't like this
Right.
Edo guy or whatever, right?
Right.
It becomes an objective assessment. So that's why that whole thing happened. But then when the GC found out, she's like the 13th hire in the company.
Right. So she knew. Yeah.
So obviously from day one, she's been part of the company from an early stage.
Right.
So she was never in the know as to what was going on here.
Yeah.
So that's why when she finally found out, she asked me to send her everything, and then she ran to the board and said, "Do you know what's going on?"
Yeah.
And that's where all things went downhill from there.
Okay. So let's unpack that. So I think so this is the layers, right? So it's like you, your boss, general counsel, board, right? CEO and board, right? And I think it sounds like you and your boss were like aligned to be like, let's do the right thing.
Yes.
And so you got approval, and then you set up Raja and Tan, you had your own budget.
Yep.
And it gave, and that process took what, like for the Raja and Tan report,
Like
about
6 weeks.
6 weeks or 2 months, let's just say. And then eventually it was, and then your internal whistleblower was getting more and more scared. And what was the illegal transactions? Be like what, wiring money to a different entity they're not approved to? What does illegal transaction mean? Yeah.
I mean, they were faking documents and contracts and
she
literally
knew.
forging stuff.
So she knew that it was forged documents.
Yeah.
But that's why she saw it as a legal transaction.
It was scary because what was happening is they would have a unknown third party that pretends to be a client that invoices them. So the money moves from one entity to that third party. That third party then moves the money to another Wirecard entity.
Yeah.
That Wirecard entity moves it to another third party company, which shouldn't be a customer of Wirecard. And these are millions being moved around.
Yeah.
And then at some point you lose trail of what happens from that third party company.
Correct.
Right. And that's clearly that's just clearly round tripping.
Yeah.
And potential money laundering for sure.
Right. Yeah.
And as a payments company, that's not what you should be doing. So some of these invoices were very obvious. Like you had a matchmaking company providing payment services to Wirecard, which doesn't make any sense because it's the other way around.
Right.
And then you also had, like in Malaysia, a market intelligence study being commissioned out of Malaysia,
Right.
but invoiced for 4 million euros. So it's probably like the best market study in the world. But again, like that may be the case, but you can't invoice out of Malaysia in euros. That's just like not possible, right? So all these like really weird stuff. And Ido was pretending to be a director. He was signing off on a few things.
Yeah.
He was also doing user acceptance testing in these contracts, which he has no experience in doing. So yeah, just very clearly. I mean, one of the companies was called Flexi Flex, which is a very sexy name if you go to the gym or something. But they were invoicing Wirecard for 3D secure tokenization services, for example. And that's what Wirecard actually provides. And if anyone goes to FlexiFlex website, it still exists. It's a Malaysian company doing well, I guess. They do piping, hose, hydraulic stuff. So that's why it was so like, how can audit, even if it's internal audit or external audit, miss this? It's just a Google search.
Right.
The name itself doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So that it was that level of basic and obvious, which in any normal company you would suspend these individuals because they're from the finance team, and you would just get rid of them. But in fact, the opposite happened, where they were for Ido was actually promoted globally for his hard work. And I was the one who was then, it was my life that was made hell for the next few months.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. So once you go to GC, the board, and so I think to me that again logically makes sense, which is the board is always the last to know, and they always like, so obviously they're gonna send back a question, which is this correct? Is this accurate? Blah blah. So when did you start realizing that this is not normal? Because it is normal to get query from the general. It's normal for the general counsel to report to the board. It's normal for the board to query you and say, are you correct? You should don't get it wrong. So I mean, that's like you're opening up a shitstorm. You already know the box is going to be open, the shit's going to fly. So you know that's not going to happen. But when did you realize it was like, oh wait, this is not an internal board investigation. Like this is going off the rails.
Because they wanted to shut down the investigation. Then they told me to step aside, and the COO, Jan Marsalek, he wanted to take over the investigation, but he was named as a suspect in a lot of the documents or things we came across. So that's one of the most difficult things. How do you tell the second most powerful person in the company that you cannot take over an investigation because you yourself are a person of interest? Like there's just no diplomatic way to craft that email, right? But then what then went downhill is when the Munich side with the GC and the local Singapore director, they started making my life difficult. So he started shouting at me every time in the office and intimidating me, saying, I don't know what you have been doing the last few months. If you know what's good for you, you'll play ball and all these things. So I didn't understand what his problem was because I kept telling him, I'm actually looking after you.
Right.
Because you're a director, if anything goes wrong, like you'll
Right.
be in trouble, right?
Right.
So why is he like not taking that mindset? And then he would say like his wife is a lawyer, he's not scared of anything and so on. So then he started coordinating all kinds of crazy stuff against me in the office,
Right.
attacking my work, doing a HR case against me,
Right.
which really upset me because as a guy, once that happens,
Yeah.
it's like, okay, he literally went below the belt, right? That failed, but it took 3 months to investigate.
What was this HR case?
So what they did is they hired this lawyer and they put her under me.
Oh yeah.
And then that same lawyer was not reporting to me, but reporting to him.
Yeah.
So she was very insubordinate, had a fake CV and things that didn't add up. And she was always asking me what is happening in this investigation, which she's not meant to be part of.
Yeah.
And she'll always be sitting in this guy's office.
Yeah.
So at some point I decided I want to fire her.
Yeah.
And that's where she ran to him and he said, you're not allowed to fire her.
Yeah.
I was like, why not?
Yeah.
So he said, oh, because she says that you have harassed her, which is why you want to fire her. So is that kind of really weird nonsense?
Yeah.
And then they put her in Ido's team. So she directly ended up reporting to Ido. So it was like, guys, you couldn't be more obvious in your nonsense, right?
Yeah.
So then they took 3 months to investigate this whole issue, add further stress on me.
Yeah.
That upset the whole office. And when that failed, so everything didn't work out in that aspect.
Yeah.
That's when they decided, okay. So Ido came back and he wanted to have lunch.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the first things Ido ever said to me was that he's married to a drug dealing family in Jakarta. That was his first introduction to me when I joined Wirecard and met him. This time he wanted to send me back to Jakarta on a business trip, which made no sense based on how he explained it. And he said, no, you still have to go, whether in 2 days, 2 weeks, or 2 months, you must go. But you have no reason to worry because you know who my father-in-law is, right? So I saw that as a direct kind of threat, and you wouldn't want to just rock up in Jakarta
Right.
when you are investigating or you are in the middle of this whole mess.
Right.
Because anyone can just drive in the traffic jam on a scooter and just shoot you and go off, and no one cares, right?
Right.
And on top of that, to make things worse, during that week, I had 2 anonymous phone calls from Germany saying, hello, is this Pav Gill? We understand you're being told to go to Jakarta. Don't go, you won't come back. Boom, and they put the phone down. So obviously I didn't want to go. That's where the company was very happy, I guess, because now they can force me to resign finally on the basis of not going for a business trip. And I did, so that's what happened. So I resigned. I said, okay, Wirecard, you enjoy your fraudulent ways. I go look for another job. Yeah. But because they didn't stop their nonsense even after that, that is what led to eventually the whistleblowing.
Okay, so this is actually really interesting. Okay, so first of all, I mean, the fact that you're being asked to go to Indonesia, obviously, well, on the face of it, seems normal. Like nothing wrong going to Indonesia to get some mee goreng, and get a massage, and then after that, go take some selfies. Nothing wrong with that. And obviously, it's a business trip, obviously.
Yeah.
But I guess the part that is interesting is that you got these calls to say don't go because you might get killed. Now,
Yes.
I guess the question was the guy person calling you because they didn't want you to go for sure, or it was a nice person calling you to tell you because they really were warning you?
Yes.
From a good faith perspective.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
I mean, and the whole business reason they wanted me to go didn't make any sense.
Right.
Because they said it's for a rebranding exercise.
Right.
I'm like, I've given you 2 law firms with their codes.
Yeah.
I don't need to physically be there.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's why it became very dodgy, right? The whole like 2 months, 2 weeks, 2 days thing.
Yeah, which person is like, you can go on a business trip, but it's between 2 weeks to 2 months.
Yeah, or 2 days, like just go. Right?
It's normally like, hey, there's a conference we got to go to, or there's a meeting we got to do. But so you're saying that the person called you, it wasn't because they were trying to stop you from going so that you'll get fired. This person was actually had good intentions for you and was trying to warn you nicely. Did you ever find out who that person was?
No, it wasn't just one person. There were 2 phone calls during that week.
From 2 different people?
Yes.
2 friendly people called you.
In Germany, yeah.
From
I don't know
Germany.
who they are.
You don't know who they are? You still don't know who they are?
No, because the phone call is like a few seconds long. It's on the landline. We still use those things those days.
So, and you still don't know who they are?
No.
So, I guess they were saving your life, but they I guess they didn't want to tell you. I mean, maybe in 10 years or 20 years when things blow over, they might tell you.
Yeah, maybe, But again, I wouldn't know if it's true.
But it's good that they told you, right? Because if they didn't call you, you might have been like...
No, I still wouldn't go.
You still wouldn't go.
That's when I got my mom involved, right?
That's when you come. Okay, so let's talk about your mom. What's helpful now is that your mom is a lawyer. So
she's not a lawyer. She had a law degree.
She had a law degree.
She went into banking, and then eventually she kind of slowed down. And
gotcha.
Yeah.
So she knew both the corporate, okay, so finance. So how does that conversation go? Like, I don't know, you go over to her house for a family dinner or
No, I
something.
live with her.
Oh, you live
So I
with her?
still live with her.
So you were talking to her all the time about this issue as it was developing?
No, I wasn't. So that's a weird thing. Like
Yeah.
you are so isolated in
Yeah.
this situation
Right.
that you have to navigate everything on your own. You can't tell your colleagues why this crazy director guy in Singapore is doing these things.
Right, right.
Why are you being investigated for
Right.
absolute nonsense? Or why are you now singled out?
Yeah,
Right? You can't talk to them because it's sensitive, it's confidential.
yeah. Right.
You can't talk to your friends outside for the same reason.
Right.
So then the reason why I had to tell my mom is because if these guys were now going down the pathway of literally trying to kill you, it was only fair that she finds out what's going on in case something happens,
Right.
whether in overseas or in Singapore. So that's where she got involved and I had to tell her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you told her like, hey, I was invited on a business trip, but I
No, I
don't.
told her what's going on. I said, I'm investigating this thing. There's a lot of fraud going on from what I see. Now they've been doing this to me the last few months and they wanted me to go to Jakarta. So she actually said, you're not going. And she would take my passport and hide it. So I told her, like, that's actually a criminal offense, but okay. So that's what happened, right? Because I mean, my mom's more street smart than I am to some extent. So she always says like men are very innocent or naive. So she could like sense these insidious things more than me because I think because I was stuck in the whole setting, I kept thinking that no, it can't be. At some point, the company will do the right thing and I'll be vindicated. So a lot of people always ask like, why did you not leave the company during these 4 months? And it's because of that. Firstly, like I was doing my job, I was doing it well, I think. And I was still trying to make sure with the external law firm that things were being coordinated, that the case would still go. And I was still having an obligation, at least a moral one, to the whistleblower, who I kept, the identity of whom I kept secret until today.
Yeah.
Yeah, I called her Bobby. So no one even knows if it's male or
Yeah.
female.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just thought at some point that, and the law firm was also telling me like, just hang in there because the more we find out, the worse it looks for the company.
Yeah.
So it was really a race against time. Who would cave first or who would be forced to.
Right.
And it's not, I mean, frankly, it's not easy to just leave a job and walk into another job, right? Especially the more senior you are.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was the reasons why I stayed in the company for so long.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting is that then you felt like, okay, at some point they had grounds to dismiss you. So you could have either been fired, but you chose to resign.
Yeah, I was given either option.
Oh, so they literally came up to you and they gave you.
Yeah, the same director guy was very smug about it.
Yeah, he was smart about it. And he was like, you chose not to go to work.
Yeah, basically. And then he went on this whole spiel about how he told me to play ball and I didn't. I thought I could run to the general counsel who will protect me. But little do I know that she listens to everything he says. And that he's just one of those very annoying people to work for. Because Wirecard purchased his company in Singapore and Malaysia and made him rich. And then he became like the local boss, APAC CEO type person. And he'll be the kind of person that's always giving these wise anecdotes. Like, with great power comes great responsibility and all these things, right? So he's really like the kind of uncle that you can't really handle for very long. But he would have his like sycophants around him that will follow him around everywhere. Right? So that's why he was very proud of himself that this thing concluded this way. And in fact, ironically, I think he actually caused the downfall of Wirecard. Because he must have told HQ that don't worry about this Pav guy. I know how to deal with him. He's actually, I will settle this. But because he didn't, I think that's what eventually led to the downfall of the company. So even after I left the company, they were sending people to follow us and all these things. At first, I thought they were really low budget on that because you're not supposed to know when someone's following you. But then I realized, no, they actually want you to know as a form of intimidation. Right. So they were doing all these things. They were setting up fake interviews with friendly firms, knowing I need a job. But then the interview process was all about why I left Wirecard. Did something bad happen? I can tell them. And then I knew why they're doing that. So if I said something wrong, I breach an NDA or whatever. And so that's why at some point my mom got pissed and she said, okay, I had enough. I'm going to teach this company a lesson.
So how did your mom teach them a lesson?
Well, from the sofa in the house, she made friends with powerful people and journalists. Like Clare Brown was the first one she got in contact with. And Claire exposed one MD through Sarawak report. So Claire actually said she knows the FT's been working on Wirecard for the last few years, but getting nowhere. So Claire put us in touch with the FT. So that's how the FT got involved.
So let's talk about that. I mean, obviously, I always say never piss off a mom, right?
Yeah,
You know,
for sure. It's really unwise.
really advice. Yeah, you can go after anyone, but if you
Yeah.
piss off the mom will go full 100%. So, but let's talk about that, right? So, like, obviously, she's your confidant and she knows all about this stuff. And but you were being a professional, right? You were like recruiting for a job. You resigned the report, and you were like, you said you wanted that Wirecard settled because the report is there.
Yeah.
But you weren't thinking about going and talking to a journalist.
I mean, the routes explored
Yeah.
or thought processes were,
Yeah.
do you go to the police? Do you go to MAS or whoever?
Yeah.
But then the issue, I think, is if you want the company, if you want fast action, then the best way we strategize was if a reputable paper starts reporting about wrongdoings in Singapore in this company here. Because Singapore is hypersensitive on all these things, they will be forced to act fast. Because otherwise, if you go to the police or you just lodge a issue, it would just potentially be filed away and not looked at for many years. There's no way to force the action. But the FT strategy was the way, and it did. So within the third FT article, when it finally came out, immediately Singapore raided Wirecard's office. It was the only country that acted on what happened.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that. Like, I don't know, did you feel when your mom went to talk to the journalist first and then connected you both? When she did that, were you, like, was that agreed upon as a plan, or she did it without you?
No,
or-
she told me basically.
She told you?
We are meeting the FT this weekend. I was like, what are you doing? I don't speak to journalists, right? I don't even trust them.
Yeah, as a lawyer, don't hang out with journalists.
Yeah,
It's like the one rule is like lawyers and journalists do not drink in the same
exactly.
group together, right?
Yeah, and I was more concerned, but like what I don't want to be, I'm literally trying to look for another job.
Yeah.
But she's like, no, we need to speak to the FT. They are familiar with this case. And we also can understand just conversationally how they their sources.
Right.
Right. So because Wirecard was still doing a lot of nonsense in the background towards me.
Yeah.
So we needed to create a distraction for them that's big enough for them to stop focusing on me and go fix these other fires. So that was the reason behind it.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, as a lawyer, clearly, right, you don't, there's legal privilege issues, all these things, which always play on your mind. But I was very confident on those grounds because privilege wouldn't cover like criminal offenses, criminal acts. And legal privilege, for example, is meant to have the lawyer protect the client, basically at the end of the day.
Right.
But if the client's trying to kill that same lawyer,
Right.
then I guess it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Because then all the rules of engagement are out the window.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what happened. And we met the FT introductory meeting in Changi Airport.
Right.
I still remember, I think it was Coffee Bean or somewhere.
Yeah.
And then the FT's correspondent, the one in Singapore, Stefania, he then reported back to Dan McCrum saying, these guys are actually legit.
Yeah.
And that's when Dan came down the next week for 3 days in Singapore. And we went through about 70% of what I had because I still wanted to keep the 30%.
Yeah.
Because I still didn't trust these guys, right? Because I've seen like in 1MDB and stuff, like what happened to whistleblowers. The guy ended up in jail because he was exposed in the process.
Right.
Yeah. And so very important is you've got to keep whistleblowers anonymous.
Yeah.
That's when things really get ugly when they get exposed.
Right.
Because unless you're very, very powerful as a whistleblower, you don't have the resources to take on a corporate because they can completely damage you financially.
Yeah, of course.
And reputationally.
Yeah.
If they think you have stuff against them. And if a company's in the business of forging documents and stuff, there's nothing preventing them from doing the same thing against you.
Yeah.
Right. And saying like, no, he was actually part of this. Look at our stuff that we have against him.
Right.
Especially with AI deepfakes and stuff, it gets even more complicated.
Yeah.
Do you then have the ability to prove otherwise?
Right.
So that's why I had to leave the company with the raw inbox data of these guys.
Right.
Because that was the proof. So if that's forensically analyzed, it will show it's never been modified. It is real.
Right.
And I think that's what the company never saw coming.
Right.
Was for the first time someone from the inside with real data could now expose them.
Right.
So because people always ask, why would Wirecard hire you if you had such a good CV and they were doing bad things? It's because of that. Like the access of info was controlled so much at the top level. They would never in their wildest dreams imagine like someone at the lower side, the subsidiary side or wherever, would suddenly make that connection from an objective data standpoint.
Yeah.
And that's what happened with the inboxes.
Right. Which is that you had a copy of the inboxes.
Yeah.
And that was the most important part because that was extracted part of the Raja and Tan process.
Yes.
That was the smoking gun, I guess, in that
Yes.
sense to say that this is the start of the process to pull the thread, right? As it goes up and up.
Yeah.
Now, I think what's interesting is that you said that there was this anonymous But obviously, I mean, I'm sure that so let's talk about this process. Obviously, the sourcing, the journalist is writing with you, and so forth. So obviously, the article comes out, and I remember that reading that first article, which was quite explosive.
Yeah, Ito's face on it.
Yeah, but I mean, wouldn't they know it's you? Like, even though you're protected as anonymous whistleblower, wouldn't they know it's like it must be this dude?
Yeah, yeah. But they definitely suspected it was me or maybe another dude
Yeah,
who was part of this whole thing.
yeah.
But then there's a difference between suspecting and being able to prove it.
Gotcha. So is this at least it's like if I had to kill both of you instead of killing one of you.
Yeah.
'Cause, yeah.
They actually
Yeah.
paid a third-party intelligence company
Yeah.
to find out who the whistleblower was.
Really?
Yeah, they paid them 2 to 300,000 euros, and that company gave them the wrong person. So out of the 50-50, they chose the wrong one for such an expensive fee, right?
I feel good for you, but I feel bad for the other person because the other person was probably.
I mean, they could have just transferred me the money.
Yeah.
Would have said, yeah, it's me. Thanks for the cash, right?
Sorry, that's so.
But it's too late.
That's too late. That's so bad. That's so funny. And wait, and then of course they were like following you. Like, was it very obvious when they're following you?
It's very obvious.
Like what? Like it's like what some dude is.
No, it's like those like Thai-looking workers,
Yeah.
construction worker types with the tattoos and stuff.
And they're walking behind you the entire time.
Yeah, taking pics, and then they'll walk. We live on a corridor unit,
Yeah.
so they'll walk up and down the corridor. They'll go on the block opposite,
Yeah.
and then from there just look. So it's like really obvious.
Oh, it's the same dude as well.
I mean, not every day,
Yeah, every day, but
but why is someone doing that?
yeah,
Right.
exactly.
And of course, you can't like go complain to the police because nothing has technically happened.
Yeah,
It's like, okay, people walking around, what do you want us to do?
yeah, exactly. It just happens to be the stranger on your corridor
Yeah.
who does, it's not a neighbor.
Yeah, it's not a crime.
Yeah, it's not a
To
crime.
even follow someone is not a crime.
Yeah,
It's just, I mean, unless you're harassing them. But it was one of those cases. And my fear was because my mom is very fearless. So that puts fear in you.
because you're scared that she will confront them and then something like.
Yeah, or what could these people do?
Yeah.
Because she's the kind of person that every late in the evening she would hang the clothes in the corridor to dry
yeah,
and stuff, right? So I'm out working and
Right.
finding a job. I
Right.
don't want to have this fear factor.
Yeah.
Or people could throw acid or something.
Yeah,
Who
yeah.
knows?
Oh,
They
yeah.
may not kill you, but you don't want a situation.
Yeah.
So that was what really triggered. So if anyone asks, like, was I ever scared in the process? It's because of that. It wasn't anything else.
Yeah, yeah, because they could push her down the stairs.
Yeah.
Something that looked like an accident as well, just to.
Yeah.
Yeah, so many horrible things could happen. So no, I think it's interesting because then obviously the whistleblower happens, and then eventually the whole Wirecard house of cards starts to fall apart. And obviously, I think the expose is actually also larger than what you saw, right? Because you saw from the bottom APAC.
Yes.
And then I think FT did a really good job explaining the whole thing, if that makes sense. Did you feel like, were you surprised or shocked by the scale of it? Or no? Because at that point you were like, it has been really bad. Or,
I mean, it was a very active process of engagement.
right.
So what I did triggered
Yeah.
other information to come in after
Right.
those articles were out, the first few articles. But what I didn't expect was how the German regulators and stuff would react on the very first day. So they said it's not a Wirecard problem, it's a short selling problem, and it's an Asian problem. And that's things that regulators normally do not say.
Yeah.
Because you would just say the standard stuff, which is we understand allegations have been made, we are looking into it till then, no comment. But to come out on day one and say that it's the company's not in any wrongdoing
Yeah.
is highly unusual.
Right.
And that's when I realized that I'm going against not just the regulators, I mean, not just Wirecard, but regulators, external auditors, and whoever else that are hell bent on protecting this company for whatever reason.
Right.
So that's when I had to go a bit vigilante
Yeah.
and go on Twitter and create this anonymous account.
Yeah.
I would publish things there which journalists cannot publish
Right.
for ethical or other reasons.
Right.
And then my mom suffered a stroke and out of the stress that was happening.
Right.
And then as part of the stroke scans, they found she had stage 2 lung cancer to cut off half a lung and stuff.
Yeah.
So it became very personal
Right.
that we needed to see this through.
Yeah.
I mean, basically don't half-ass this thing now.
Yeah.
Because if you want, you better do it properly.
Right.
And that's where, and because the Germans started going, they started going after the FT criminally
Right. Oh boy.
and nullifying everything. They even put a short selling ban on Wirecard stock,
I remember.
which is insane. So that's when I realized we need to change the perception from within Germany. And I got Süddeutsche Zeitung, the powerful Munich paper,
Yeah.
which was behind Paradise Panama leaks.
Yeah.
They came down. They were actually in Mount E at the hospital bed, and I gave them even more information.
Right.
So when they finally published, the first time Germany kind of shook was because of their article.
Right.
So now we have not only the jealous UK paper,
Right.
but our own papers are now saying something is really wrong with
Yeah.
this PayPal of Europe that we have here.
Right.
So that's when things started. And then the Twitter profile got a lot of hedge funds attention.
Right.
Eventually that forced a KPMG
Right.
special audit.
Right.
And it's a whole story, like Dan has written it very well in Moneyman, very extensively. It's crazy stuff.
Right.
And finally the company crashed after 1.5 years.
Yeah. So I think what's interesting is that it took 1.5 years even for it to crash, right? Because it had so much protection by weirdly the German state, and most people think of the German state as efficient, fair, neutral. I mean, I'm just saying non-partisan in general. So why do you think there was like regulatory capture, or what happened there? Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I think Germany is definitely a stakeholder in many aspects of Wirecard.
Right.
There was we also know that the regulator staff were trading Wirecard stock till the last day.
Oh.
Which isn't nice.
Yeah.
But what was unforgivable in my view was the fact that before the FT articles came out, like 1 week or within the week before that, maybe 3 days, I had created a dossier of all the documents and indexed it nicely to make it idiot proof.
Right.
I sent it to the external auditors, to MAS, CAD, everybody, including the German side.
Right. Yeah.
So why are they behaving like they don't know? They don't have the evidence.
Right.
They have it. So why is that insistent desire not to want to look at it?
Yeah.
And they kept casting it conveniently as an Asian problem.
Right.
But okay, maybe an Asian problem, but this is your listed company with the HQ.
Right.
And if you actually ask the question, you'll realize nothing in Asia can happen without HQ signing off.
Right.
So it's just those very basic things that are frustrating.
Right. And so I think what's interesting is that also this whole thing fell apart, and obviously justice was served in some ways. But also I think you as a whistleblower have also become public, right? You know, because you eventually, right? So what was that process for you to be like, I'm comfortable becoming public or known as the whistleblower?
Yeah, of course, there's a strong desire in these things to want to come out thumping your chest and saying like, it was me, I front stabbed you, not backstabbed you.
It was me all along.
But yeah, there's always that desire, right? From a justice, like, okay, I have finally succeeded, and you guys now in the bad ones.
Right.
But you still have to be wise, because if the company's crashed, it's going through an insolvency process, and the last thing you want to do is get sued by them still.
Right. Yeah.
It's like last burst of fire before going down, right?
Right. Yeah.
I just killed this guy at the same time. So I had to wait a year. And then the Sky documentary, which is the only movie I'm in, that was focused on me and my mom and what really happened behind the scenes.
Right.
So that was being filmed, and the day it was being released a year after the company crashed. That's when I told the FT and as that you can publish who it is on the same day, because people will find out anyway.
Right. Yeah.
And that's where that's what put me in the public space as the whistleblower. But I always like to remind everyone, like, Wirecard's a very rare case of successful whistleblowing.
Yeah.
Because the company actually suffered the consequences.
Right.
But in most cases, whistleblowers get exposed in the process and absolutely damaged.
Right.
So yeah, it's something to always keep in mind.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that now you're building a company that is focusing on whistleblowing as one of the modules you're doing, helping with governance, etc. So let's talk. So I want to kind of like unpack that a little bit, right? So you were looking for a job, and then you were a lawyer, general counsel for two more companies, right? Maybe you could share a little bit more, and then you eventually became a founder.
Yes.
So can you just unpack that journey? Yeah.
Yeah, so the whole 1.5 years of exposing Wirecard, I like to say it was like a side gig.
Yeah.
It's great for stress relief. But I was working, so I joined Wise as their first APAC counsel, for example.
Right.
But then in the evening when I'm frustrated, I'll go and do my Twitter stuff and start being this whistleblower guy, right?
Wow. It's like
I had a bad day. Let me take it out on Wirecard. And all its bots that are attacking me.
Yeah.
So yeah, Twitter does have its good use in that sense.
So you're doing a day job, and nobody at Wise knew it was you.
Nobody.
So they were, what a nice guy, Pav. You know?
Yeah.
What are you doing after work today? You want to go for drinks? And you're like, no, I gotta use Twitter.
No, I would go for the drinks, but if the drinks had a negative effect, then Wirecard suffered, right?
Yeah, exactly. So there you are. Obviously, you're going through that, and you had that job at Wise, and then eventually.
Then I moved to Bangkok.
Yeah.
And I was the general counsel of a crypto exchange.
Yeah.
So the movie is actually filmed in real time.
Yeah.
The last 3 days of me being in Singapore.
Yeah.
So they actually filmed me going from the home to Changi Airport for my real flight to Bangkok. So Bangkok, that was during COVID. So the whole 14-day quarantine and stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was only midway through my journey in Bangkok that this article came out and revealed who I was.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's what happened. Since then, I was doing a lot of global public keynote speaking, like global keynote speaking events. So all these different companies, regulators, MNCs, Big Fours would get me to speak, other than, obviously. Yeah, that's the only Big Four I haven't spoken about. spoken for or at, which is unfortunate. Yeah, so my bigger question in life was always, what was the bigger reason behind exposing Wirecard? Like,
Yeah.
why me, not some other random guy?
Right, right.
And because I was discussing the EU whistleblowing law, which
Right.
Wirecard actually accelerated the
Right.
implementation of, it just hit me because I have seen how challenging it is for companies to deal with internal reporting cases, whether it's whistleblowing in the financial crime sense or it's HR issues
Right.
like bullying, harassment,
Right.
Me Too, and the likes, or it's even things like data breach. Should we tell our customers? Should we tell our regulators? Should we deal with the threat actor? So all these different kinds of internal reporting, I've seen the challenges. And I've also used the so-called existing solutions, so I'm familiar with them. All of them only focus on receiving reports. But then what happens after that?
Right.
So having put the Wirecard, the whistleblowing mindset experience in there, okay, if there was something that was truly end-to-end,
Right.
not just a receiving channel,
Right.
then that audit trail is there.
Right.
Then maybe even the general counsel in Wirecard can't say she didn't know.
Right. Yeah.
Because through that, she knew, and how did she deal with it?
Right.
So then I said, yeah, let me just do this. Let me put all my experience, my life's journey into a product that will benefit people, companies, and lawmakers.
Right.
And that's how the idea of Confide platform was formed. And I think the word confide is very powerful
Right.
because, like when I mentioned isolation, every time you're in a situation where you see something wrong, you want to speak up, you don't know who to confide in, or you're confiding in the wrong person,
Right.
or you're just limited from confiding by legal privilege, NDAs, whatever. So having that name, having that that encrypted anonymous ability, and most importantly, giving companies a chance to deal with things before they explode. They don't wake up. We see that all the time, like something bad happens in the press.
Right.
Then the senior executives are like, okay, what happened? How come we didn't know?
Yeah.
If we knew, we'd have done something about it.
Right.
So fixing that specific problem, the end-to-end and everything, was how Confide started. So whistleblowing naturally with my storyline was the kind of like the beachhead product.
Right.
And that's how we started, and now we have expanded into full operational compliance aspects.
Yeah. And my last question here really would be like, could you share a personal story about the time that you felt the most brave?
I mean, that's a difficult one, having gone through a lot of things in life. But I think I felt the most brave was when I was in the US. It was my first trip last year. I was keynote for Diligence Annual Summit, and it was in Houston. And I was sitting after my talk at the basement, at the ground floor restaurant. Restaurant had a glass wall that looked out into the street. So it was on street level. Yeah, so he was walking up and down, and I knew there's something dodgy about this guy.
Yeah.
So I actually understood for the first time why gun laws exist.
Right.
Because if this guy had actually come into the restaurant and opened fire, everyone's a sitting duck,
Right. Yeah.
right? You
Right.
literally have no defense.
Right.
But and I, for the first time, actually felt afraid if that situation materialized because he was walking into the hotel for absolutely no good reason. And so it was that time which I then quickly went to security and I said, you should look at this guy, he's acting suspiciously. So yeah, I would say that was like a brave moment, but yet it was brave because I think I actually felt afraid for the first time properly in a life and limb setting. And then I acted on it by alerting the people about this threat. Yeah. But it was an eye-opening experience.
I think it's interesting because when people look at the whole thing, they will probably say like the brave thing is this whole Wirecard thing, but you're saying that you didn't feel as fearful. You don't feel like that set of decisions around whistleblowing on Wirecard it wasn't as brave. And could you share a little bit more about that? Yeah.
I mean, it's brave, of course. It's brave / crazy to some extent.
Yeah.
Trying to take down a company like that, or expose them rather. But I think if you want to talk about Wirecard-related bravery, I would say that the bravery in terms of the Wirecard story for me as a person was eventually confronting the fact that what experience I had there had an impact on me down the line, not immediately, but subsequently.
Right.
So after when I was in Bangkok and the crypto company I was working with, that collapsed because of whatever happened in the crypto space with the FTX and everything.
Right.
That's when I started getting like all these panic attacks and stuff. So that's where for the first time in my life I was forced to confront this whole issue of mental well-being.
Right.
Which was a very challenging process. So in terms of bravery was being able to confront that as a man, especially we are very driven by, we cannot show weakness and there's no such thing, go to the gym and man up and stuff.
Right.
But then when it hits you, and you're forced to deal with it, I think that takes a lot of willpower and accepting and reflection, which has, to me, is a brave process because not many people find it easy to deal with.
Yeah.
So then getting into things like breath work and talking about these things, I think that to me was the link to the Wirecard story in terms of bravely confronting the impact of that on you as a human being.
Right.
Yeah.
And if I may, just one last bit is obviously this is obviously very stressful and scary with panic attacks. I think you and I have both met the whistleblowers as well who have emerged, right, as a function of the work and visibility. If there was like a whistleblower who's like listening to you or somebody seeing something is not going well,
Yeah.
and you were getting coffee with them outside, what advice or how would you approach that conversation today? Yeah.
I mean, I would ask them genuinely, what is it that you want to
Yeah.
achieve?
Yeah.
Sometimes you got to work backwards,
Yeah.
right, to answer that question. Because what matters to you most, like, is raising this issue, exposing this wrongdoing, or having peace of mind? Like, what gives you that peace of mind every day is how you should then focus your attentions towards. Because if the simplest solution is, okay, I can just leave the company and find another job, I'll be safe and I'll move on, and I don't need to deal with this whole mess, then that is the course of action you should take, right? I will never encourage a person to become like a full-blown whistleblower because that comes with a whole bunch of pain, especially if you don't deal with it properly.
Right.
And if you don't like go full 9 yards and see it to the end. So you need to be alive to those risks. But fundamentally, as a human, you need to do what makes you at peace with yourself. And I think that's the issue, right? Because a lot of people, even though they have got a settlement with a company for these things they may have raised, they got a settlement and they left. I think there's always that residual sense of injustice that, yeah, even to get that settlement, okay, but then these same guys who were ill-treating me, they now are even getting higher salaries and succeeding, thriving more. I find that something that I cannot live with. I still want to find a way to expose them.
Right.
So I think, again, like, we are driven by that from an emotional standpoint.
Right.
But to me, it's really what matters most to you, what will keep you safe and your family safe, and be able to make you sleep well at night and move forward. I think that's the biggest advice. Because it's not like the movies, right? Like, heroes don't always have long lives,
No, they don't.
right? So, yeah.
Yeah. In the real world, yeah, you can end up dead. Yeah.
Yeah.
Quite often, right? It's an own thing. Yeah. On that note, thank you so much for sharing. I'd love to summarize the 3 big takeaways. First of all, thanks so much for sharing about, I think, your early career, but also why you're excited to join Wirecard, and a little bit more about how you felt like things were going sideways and how you felt like you were doing the right thing for Wirecard by doing an internal investigation into what you thought was malpractice at the local level. So that was really interesting. Secondly, thanks for sharing about, I think, the broader exploration where you realize you're coming under pressure, that headquarters were squeezing you, that you eventually had to resign and forced to resign, and then had to go and talk to the press and kind of like work with the system and through the system and against the system to get the truth out there, eventually leading to the collapse of the Wirecard unicorn. And then lastly, thanks so much for sharing about your own new company, about how you think you can improve like governance practices and make better governance possible for boards, for VCs, for management, for whistleblowers, for employees. So thank you so much for sharing.
Sure. Thanks. Enjoyed myself. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Brave. If you enjoyed this episode, please share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. We would also appreciate you leaving a rating or review. Head over to www.bravesea.com for member content, resources, and community. Stay well and stay brave.